Welcome to the first installment of our walkthrough tutorials for the BT by Brooklyn Tweed First Raglan sweater. If you don't know already, our BT by Brooklyn Tweed series is a series of beginner-friendly patterns designed to build new skills and expand your knitting horizons. And this pattern is an ideal for first-time sweater knitters and garment veterans alike. It is worked from the top down and includes several variations for customizing it just the way that you want. In this video, we'll go over everything that you need to know to get started on this sweater. So the first thing that you want to consider anytime that you're making a sweater is swatching. You always want to swatch, especially with garments. This is essential to set yourself up for success. I know all too well the feeling of wanting to jump right into a new project, but a little pre-work pays off big time in the grand scheme of the final result. Your future self will thank you. Since this pattern is almost entirely knit in the round, with the exception of some short rows at the back neck, speed swatching for circular knitting will get you kind of the best simulation of the finished fabric. This means that you will swatch always from the right side to simulate fabric worked in the round. We have a great tutorial on this in our swatching resource, which basically shows you how to do this. You'll have these long floats at the back, but then the same gauge as you'll get in circular fabric. Since every knitter knits differently, the suggested needle size in the pattern is only a jumping off point for swatching. So as you'll see, I've made several swatches here. You'll start with the suggested needle size usually, which is 7 for this pattern, and either go up or down a needle size until you get to that sweet spot of the pattern's gauge. Here we're going for 5 stitches per inch and 7 rounds per inch. So you can see with this swatch, I started with a size 7 needle that's suggested in the pattern, but my gauge was a little bit too large. It was more like 4.5 stitches per inch. And so I went down to a size 6. I still didn't quite get there, and then I finally went down to a size 5. You'll see here I got pretty much exactly 5 stitches to the inch. However, you always want to block your swatch, and that's something that it can be really tempting to skip, but the gauge and the drape of your fabric literally can change between blocking. Here I have a swatch that hasn't been blocked, but it was also worked on size 5s, and the gauge isn't quite the same. You'll see it's just under 5 stitches to the inch, but after blocking, it's gone to that. And so, I mean, sometimes it can go up or down. Like I said, everybody knits differently. Blocking any yarn that you do will have different behavior, and so you always want to swatch and then block your swatch so that you can make sure that you're always set up for success. The next step, once you've got the pattern's gauge, is choosing a size. The pattern has suggested sizing guidance based on your chest circumference, which will give you 3.5 to 5.5 inches of ease. Now, I know that doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you haven't knit a sweater before. You basically want to know what your chest circumference is before anything. You will use a soft measuring tape to measure around the fullest part of your chest, and that will give you what your actual chest circumference is. That is not the same as what these measurements are. These are the chest circumferences of the finished sweater. That is the circumference here. You'll compare that to your chest measurement, and the difference between those two is the ease. And so, for example, I'm making the second size, 39.5, with 4.5 inches of ease because my chest circumference is 35 inches. There are 11 sizes with these chest circumferences ranging from 35.5 inches to 75.5 inches, and you can do basically any amount of ease that you want within that. The possibilities are basically endless. Ease is the difference between your chest circumference measurement and the chest circumference measurement, or whatever measurement you're going by in the pattern of the finished garment. So these finished sizes, like I said, will have 3.5 to 5.5 inches of positive ease, so it's 3.5 to 5.5 inches more than your chest circumference. based on these size guides, but you can go with, if you prefer more or less ease, you can add your preferred amount of ease to your chest circumference and then choose the size whose finished circumference falls closest to that. If you don't know where to start to find your preferred amount of ease, measuring a favorite sweater is a really helpful way to figure that out. We have a great resource on our website for selecting a sweater size, which also goes more in depth to this process. It's also really cool that the companion for this pattern includes options to customize the shape of the sweater. So as you can see, the body here has kind of a boxy cropped shape and a bloused sleeve. The companion includes instructions for more of a tapered body and then a non-bloused sleeve, and you can mix and match that however you want. So as you'll see also in this pattern, there are a lot of numbers on little tables. Not a lot of patterns have these, some of them do, and we decided to use those on here because it serves to have all of the relevant numbers for your size in one place. You can highlight those and fill them in as you want. And you can see I've highlighted mine since I'm working size 2 and put in the numbers here from that table. For casting on, since you're going to be starting from the top of the sweater right here, this is where you'll cast on, you want to make sure that you use a really flexible cast on that's stretchy so that it will go over your head. I've used the rib cabled cast on here since the neckband is ribbed, but you can also use a tubular cast on or a long tail cast on. We have plenty of tutorials for these cast ons on our website again. And then once you've cast on the number of stitches for your size, for this size it was 90, then you'll do 1 by 1 ribbing for 1 1/4 inches on your 16-inch circular needle in the size, one or two sizes smaller than the size that gets you your gauge. And after that, you'll want to place markers for the raglan lines. And so, as you can see, it's kind of hard with this small needle, but once they've been placed, after you place the raglan markers round, you'll have 4 markers on your needle, including the beginning of the round. So here we have the body, the other side of the body, and then each of the sleeves. We're going to be increasing on either side of these markers. That will make kind of 45-degree angles out from here to form the yoke of the sweater. If you don't know the word yoke, that basically just means that it is the shoulder part of the sweater from the neck down to the underarm. And this will make it so that you have these lines down your shoulders to create this really beautiful decorative kind of detail for the raglan. It's really helpful to use differently colored markers between the beginning of the round and the other raglan markers as well. You can even use different colored markers within the raglan markers, but I find it helpful just to use a differently colored one for the beginning of the round so I don't lose track of what's what. So once you've placed your markers, you're going to work a few short rows, which are just partial rounds around the stitches that are on your needle, because those will build up a little wedge of fabric on the back neck that will make the neck fit better. Short rows that are worked in the round are basically the same as when you're working them on flat fabric. You'll still be turning the work back and forth from the right side to the wrong side. We use German short rows in this pattern for their ease and polish, but you can use your preferred short row method without much trouble. So anytime that you have the short row turn in the instructions, that's where you'll work your doubled stitch for German short rows, or that's the stitch that you want to have wrapped. So I'm going to work through the first couple short rows on camera, but we do have this in-depth tutorial on German short rows, which if this technique is new to you, I highly encourage you to watch it. It's so helpful to illustrate how these are worked. So on the first short row, we'll knit 4 and then make 1. And then knit across the rest of the back stitches to 4 stitches before the next marker. Now we're 4 stitches before the next one, so we're going to make one again. This is part of our raglan increases. And then knit to that marker, do the same thing. So we'll knit 4, make 1, and then make another one 4 stitches before the next marker. And then now we are getting to that next marker. So here we'll knit 4 and make 1. Now we are on the front section, which is where the short rows will be ending. So this is where those short rows will be becoming progressively longer to create concentric kind of rows there to create the dip in the neckline. So after we've knit 4, made 1, we're going to knit 2. Then the different thing here is we're just going to turn the work and do a short row turn. So in the German short rows, we'll slip and pull. So we slip that first stitch with the yarn in front, then bring it all the way over to create a double stitch, and then work back. So now we're just going to purl, we're going to purl over our stitches back to the beginning of the round and then past it around to the other side of the front. So sometimes when we're doing these right at the beginning, it can be easier to turn your fabric around inside out so that it doesn't get all wonky while you're working. And now that you have gone around back to the beginning of the round and then 1 marker past it and then purled 7, we're going to do another short row turn. So it's going to be pretty similar to the first one. You turn the work around so that the right side is facing now, and then bring the working yarn to the front, slip that stitch, and then bring it over to create a double stitch. And then we're going to work back around, as you may have guessed, back to this previous turning point, making 1 stitch 4 stitch away from each of the markers. So in this row, we only have got to knit a couple stitches before we do that. And then we'll keep working back around, making 1 4 stitches away from each marker. So now we've gotten back to our first turning point where you see that double stitch. So you're just going to knit through both loops of that stitch, just as if it were a normal one, and then knit 1 past it, and then turn and do that short row slip and pull, or however you're working your short rows again. So yeah, so you will keep working 1 stitch past each short row turn as directed in the pattern, working increases on right side rows, and that will create that dip in the neckline. And now we're back at the turn point from our previous wrong side short row. So we've got our other double stitch here. So we're just going to purl into both loops as if they were 1 stitch. And then purl 1. And then turn as we have before and work that short row turn. So after you've done this, you will have a little dip at the front neck, and the back neck will be built up a little bit. As you've done this, you will have begun the raglan yoke shaping, and you'll continue that even after the short rows have finished to create kind of a rectangular shape, and keep increasing for the front and the back and each of the sleeves. They'll come kind of out at a 45-degree angle on each of them. Follow along next time as we go over how to divide the body and sleeves at the end of the yoke. Happy knitting!